Good morning and welcome to the City of Rapid City Planning Commission meeting for June 7th, 2018. If any member of the audience wishes to speak to an item on the Planning Commission agenda, there are speaker request forms on the table along the left wall. Please fill out the request with the agenda number of the item you wish to speak to and hand it to the staff seated on the left of the dais. At this time, we would also like to ask that if any member of the audience has a cell phone or other electronic device, that you either turn it off or turn the ringer to silent. If you need to take a call, please step out to the hallway so the meeting is not disrupted. Items 1 through 10 have been placed on the consent calendar and may be approved as a group. Action will be taken on all consent items in accordance with staff's recommendation by a single vote. Any item may be removed from the consent calendar by any planning commissioner, staff member, or audience member for separate consideration at this time. The findings of this planning commission are recommendations to the City Council. The City Council will make the final decision with the exception of the following item. Item 5, 18 PD 019. The Rapid City Planning Commission's actions on this item is final unless any party appeals that decision to the Rapid City Council. All appeals must be submitted in writing to the Department of Community Development by close of business on the 7th full calendar day following Planning Commission action. Are there any items 1 through 10 that staff would like removed?
Number 8, please.
Okay. Are there any items 1 through 10 that the Planning Commission would like removed? And are there any items 1 through 10 that any audience member would like removed? Then
Move to approve 1 through 10.
Galen made the motion to approve items 1 through 10 with the exception of item 8. Is there a second? Rachel seconded that motion. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. I'm actually going to have to abstain from item 8 as well. I was involved in an application on this parcel last year and have had subsequent discussions with the property owner.
So I think that means I'll take over. Item 8.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Item 8 is a preliminary subdivision plan to create 4 lots to be known as Market Square subdivision. This property is located at the intersection of East St. Patrick Street and Creek Drive in the northwest corner. We reviewed a plat of this same property last year to create 3 lots. Now they're creating 4 lots. As a part of that, we set forth stipulations of approval that identified outstanding infrastructure improvements needed in the 3 adjacent streets, and the applicant notified us yesterday that he would like to visit today about the exceptions that are noted in this staff report versus the ones that were presented in 2017. So with that, I'll just do a brief presentation, and then Mr. Chair, if it's your desire, we'll let Mr. Lettner speak to the item as well. This is an aerial of the property. You can see East St. Charles Street to the north, Creek Drive to the east, and East St. Patrick Street to the south. And I think I should probably back up. Here we go. Let's start at the beginning. That always, I guess I was. In the southwest corner of the property is an existing commercial building. Polly's is in there. There's a fitness center. There are several other uses. It's a really nice commercial building. The northern part of the property is zoned light industrial. The southern half is zoned general commercial. Future land use plan shows the entire property as mixed-use commercial. The applicant has indicated that that northern portion may be the future site for some apartments. A secondary use in mixed-use commercial is high-density residential. So we've been working with them and having some discussions about what may happen in the future with the zoning of that northern area of the property. East St. Patrick Street is a principal arterial street. You can see that in blue. Creek Drive is a minor arterial street. East St. Charles Street is industrial street based on the zoning as it stands today. The plat shows the 4 lots. It would have a shared approach coming in off of East St. Charles or East St. Patrick Street to the existing commercial development on what's to be known as Lot 4. Topographic information showing the existing commercial building, and then some projected development on the north, and obviously that may change as final design comes in. We have requested as one of our stipulations that the site plan for the Lot 4 be completed to include a parking plan, landscape plan. The location of the sign that's out there needs to be identified. I'm not sure if it's going to be on Lot 4, and that would present an issue with our sign code. But we'll work through those issues with the applicant as we proceed into the development engineering plan phase of the project. This is looking north on Creek Drive, south on Creek Drive, and that's the intersection of Creek and East St. Pat. Looking into the site, and you can see the commercial building off in the distance and the sign along East St. Patrick Street. Looking west on East St. Charles Street. And this is looking west on East St. Patrick Street. And then that's looking directly at the commercial structure as it stands. Back in 2017 and in today's report, we identified that there needs to be some additional right-of-ways and utilities brought forward as a part of this subdivision of the property. And always in those stipulations, it's noted that an exception could be requested in order to waive those improvements. Back in 2017, the applicant did request exceptions to waive some of them. Staff granted some were appealed to council. Council then acted on them. He did not receive all of the exceptions that he desired in order for that project to go forward. He has since come back with this request showing 4 lots instead of 3, and as a part of that, the requirements have been consistent in both reports, requiring that 10-foot of right-of-way be dedicated along East St. Charles Street, and a second water main be provided along, East St. Patrick Street, and a second water main along East St. Patrick Street also is required. In 2017, by the time the report got to you, the applicant had requested and secured an exception not to provide that second dual water main. To date, we've not received that exception request, so you see it in the stipulation that it would be required. I would anticipate if he submitted that exception today, the result would be the same. Staff would support that. On Creek Drive, it requires 17 additional foot of right-of-way, 16 additional feet of pavement, curb gutter sidewalk, extending the water main to the southern boundary of the property. And on East St. Charles Street, the requirement is to dedicate 5 additional feet of right-of-way, the first 200 feet, as it extends west from Creek Drive. Since Creek is an arterial, you have to have 10 additional foot of right-of-way for 200 feet for any future turn lanes. And so the plat would just show that dedication of that right-of-way. In addition, we need sidewalk along the south side of the streetlight conduit, and the difference between the reports is that now we've called out that sewer is needed to be extended to the west lot line. There's sewer along a portion of East St. Charles Street. Back in 2017, the requirement wasn't in place that he extend that sewer. At that time, the engineer that reviewed the project believed that all of the adjacent lots in the area had sewer from some source, and so where we don't need that gap filled in, we don't require that sewer or water be provided. However, in reviewing it this go-round, the engineer did note that there is a property west of this site owned by the city that cannot be sewered without the extension of this sewer to the west or to the western boundary of East St. Charles Street as it abuts this property. So with that, we've spelt that out. Mr. Lettner did email us yesterday saying that he wanted to visit about the exceptions. I will remind you that the procedure for an exception is to submit it. Staff has the authority to approve or deny those. If they're approved, then it's final. If they're denied, then the applicant appeals that decision to the Public Works Committee and the Council. Those are not considered or acted on by the Planning Commission. But we certainly wanted to give Mr. Lettner an opportunity to speak today. So with that, if you have any questions for me, I'd be glad to answer them, or Jim is here and would like to speak.
I see no other lights up, so James, you want identify yourself and
Yes, you sure can. Just set it right down there, Jim.
I appreciate it. Good morning. My name is Jim Lettner. I live at 1204 West Boulevard. I am the applicant for this property, and I, for the most part, agree with everything that Vicki just said. What she didn't discuss is that I purchased this property initially in 2004. In 2005, I submitted my first layout to the city, and I was given feedback from that layout about the necessary public infrastructure improvements that would be required in order to develop this property. At that time, there was two major outstanding public infrastructure issues. One, and I don't, Vicki, can we get an overhead here so I can,
You want to put your paper
you know what, can I look at an aerial of the area?
Yes, you sure can. Did I have the one here that would help you? How about that
That
one?
one works.
Okay,
Sure. Can I mark on there?
yes, I'll
And then-
show you.
Thank you.
We have a magical pen.
I appreciate it.
We'll just write. Mark away.
Right and clear?
Just point straight at it and then draw.
Thank you. Okay, so there were two outstanding infrastructure issues that the city wanted me to deal with in order to plat this property. Bear in mind, this property was platted in 1963 and then replatted in 1979. So what I was doing is coming into an area that had been previously developed to develop this piece of property. The biggest issue was that the drainage from Family Thrift and Ace Hardware and East St. Charles, which wasn't constructed, all came onto this site. The city at the time told me that it was and there's as there is in much of the city, and the city's tried to address some of this at this point, there was a major drainage problem in this area. I, first of all, said, no, you can't make me deal with this 12 acres of impervious land, and you can't make me run it across my property. We went back and forth, and what we came up with is getting a TIF to essentially manage all of the stormwater from my site as well as these adjacent sites that basically goes from here all the way up Creek Drive to Rapid Creek. I'm probably going to screw this up, Vicki. Thank you. The other major infrastructure issue was East St. Charles Street. East St. Charles was platted either in the 60s or in the 70s, but never constructed. The street ended right here. And at that time, the outstanding issue was that I would not be able, either I would hold this as one parcel of land, or if I wanted to plat it, I had to deal with East St. Charles. Now, the other outstanding issues were Creek Drive as an arterial street, and it was in poor repair then, it's in poor repair now. So I, at that time, when I submitted this plat, asked for an exception, and I want to give you a little bit of a timeline of how this all played out, because I think this is relevant.
And then you can just point or you can draw on this again. And you can draw right here.
Okay, thank you. I don't think I need to draw on this one. I purchased this land in 2004. Even before I closed on this, I solicited feedback from the city. In January, 6 weeks after I'd purchased that land, I submitted a layout plat and variance request. After I got that, I want to show you the staff report that I received. Because I asked for, as we were going through this, I asked for a variance to improve Creek Drive, a city street, a street that the city has owned from at least the 70s. Can everybody read that? This was my request for a variance to improvements to Creek Drive in 2005 when I started this project. I didn't have to do the improvements to Creek Drive as long as I signed a waiver of right to protest those improvements. Subsequently, I moved forward with investing in that property to be able to develop it in the future, with the understanding that I would deal with the storm sewer with a TIF, and I would construct a portion of East St. Charles with a TIF. Those were the public infrastructure requirements that I had to do to be able to develop that property. So I was going back and forth with the city, and can I go back to the drawing here, Vicki? Sure can. Oh, right, thank you. And I did not know how I was going to end up platting this. I was only allowed one approach on East St. Patrick. My initial plat didn't look anything like this. I had to construct a sanitary sewer through the back of the property here. I've got a little drawing here. Or, I'm sorry, not a drawing, but but I've spoken to some city council members about this, and they wanted an idea of the dollars that I've spent on this property in order to be able to develop it moving forward with the staff reports and the feedback that I had received from the city. This is the infrastructure that I did up until 2010. How do I go back to that? Can you guys see that? Okay. I can't see it. I'm sorry.
No, they see whatever you
Okay. Then I don't need to do that. I'm sorry. Can we just leave it on this one?
see. Sure.
I'm sorry I'm not that proficient with this stuff. I hope you bear with me. So these are the improvements that I did to be able to plat and use this property up until 2010. And bear in mind, I had a TIF. I got a TIF to do the storm sewer and to construct East St. Charles. There are the costs. I have spent a total of $722,500 to be able to develop this entire parcel of land. Of course, in fairness, some of those dollars and that infrastructure was used for this property. None of those costs are exclusive for that property, and I'm happy to go through those, and I put that together because some city council members asked to see the investment that I've already made in this infill property to be able to develop it. Now, in all fairness, of that, $474,000 went into the TIF. My problem right now is that I am 12 years into that TIF, and I am nowhere near being able to pay this $474,000 off. I think approximately $100,000 of it has been paid off. I cannot make this TIF work unless I develop this land the way the city told me that I was going to be able to develop it in 2005. So I'm sitting on the land trying to figure out what to do with it. Eric and Peter Schmidt come to me and say, you know what, let's try, the city, we keep hearing about the city wants to do affordable housing, let's try and do that on the north half of this. I'm like, perfect, I'm up for anything. I got this TIF that I'm not going to pay off. I haven't had much interest in the land. I come to plat the property to proceed with that project, and it gets shut down because of an entire new slew of public infrastructure requirements that were not required before I spent $722,000 on this property to be able to develop it. And I'm hopeful that that offends someone, that the city doesn't have the integrity to do what it said it would do when I started this project. And I want to take another step back because I think that there's something very relevant here for the Planning Commission and infill property and the development of infill property. Marcia explained this to me. I'm going to do the best that I can for you. Technically, what happens when you replat parcel of land is you vacate that land, and it is as if that ground is farm ground. And the next step is to plat that. Now, there's two important things that happen when a piece of property is developed. One is that the property gets platted. That requires a set of improvements in infrastructure that is very different than what happens when you pull a building permit to improve that property. When I started this, the city told me what I needed to do to be able to do those infrastructure and to plat this thing. What is not being taken into consideration is what I would have known had I received the feedback from the city that they're giving me today, before I spent $722,000 on this property. I would have said, you know what, this doesn't make sense to plat. I paid $1.85 a square foot for this piece of property. At this point, I've put over $2 a square foot into it to be able to use it to its highest and best use. What would have happened if I would have known that these infrastructure improvements were going to be necessary? I wouldn't be able to plat this thing. It would have become storage units. That is what would have made sense. And we have to ask ourselves whether that is in the best interest of this community to make it so impossible to develop, for someone to say, you know what, it makes more sense for me not to subdivide this, because subdividing this brings on a slew of problems and costs that are not in line with, or that I'm going to be able to see a return on. So I wanted to bring this to the Planning Commission for some of those reasons. I'm hopeful that someone is sympathetic to what I'm up here saying. And I also want to go through this staff report with staff, because as I've studied it, and I'm amazed by the additional requirements that Public Works thinks are necessary. And I think that it's imperative that you see that. And I think Vicki brought up a good, I just want to give you one example. Or she brought up two examples. One, I constructed a sanitary sewer through the middle of this property so that I could develop it. The city gave me a permit to construct East St. Charles in 2010. The city owns this street. And now they literally want me to tear up the center of East St. Charles and put a sanitary sewer down the middle of it after I constructed it in 2010. The city has owned Creek Drive since at least the 70s. Creek Drive is in poor shape. The East St. Pat, the city has owned since at least 2005 or 2006. I owned this property when the state gave the city this land. The city owns that infrastructure, and they are not taking any accountability for the condition of the infrastructure. What they are doing is saying, when you go through this two-step process of platting, when you go from changing this from something that was platted to farm ground back to platting, we have interpreted the state law to say you are starting at farm ground. And when I was talking to Marcia, I was like, well, okay, fair enough. Then what I am not platting is this lot. But I am not in the public right-of-way. These things, the city owns that infrastructure, and they are taking zero accountability for it, for the problems associated with, and they're not recognizing the dollars that I've already spent in order to develop that property. I did not spend a single dollar before I got the feedback from the city telling me the infrastructure that was going to be necessary in order to plat and develop this property. And the biggest disagreement that I have with Public Works is that they think they have absolutely no accountability to those discussions and the staff reports that I have. What I want to do is I want to be able to meet with Public Works. I was going to talk to Ted, and I want to go through some of the items on their requirements, because quite frankly, I think that they are not in the best interest of this community. I'm going to give you a perfect example. What I love is the dual water mains. You can see this, correct? This is City Ordinance 1616-100. I'm going to give you a second to read that. The city has identified Creek Drive and East St. Patrick as, I don't know if East St. Pat's a highway or an arterial street. Both of them, according to the design criteria manual, require dual water mains. When someone brings a piece of property into Rapid City to develop it and plat it, and they get the feedback that they're supposed to tear up East St. Pat and put in a dual water main because it is required by the infrastructure design criteria manual, how does that jive with the city ordinance that very clearly says the developer is not going to be required to do that level of work? A collector street does not require dual water mains. Why are we being, we're crossing the line, and my background's in engineering. We are crossing the line, are getting very close to it, between thoroughness and just flat-out obstruction. And again, what I want to do is I want you guys to be able to see this. I want to be able to go through some of these things with you at the next Planning Commission. And I want to have a chance to visit with Public Works because I don't believe that what they're doing is in the best interest of the city, and I don't believe it's in the best interest of infill development.
Okay. Thanks, Jim. Thanks for the background on your situation here. We got the rest from Karen here.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Jim, first I appreciate what you've brought forward to us because I know you're passionate about this property and it shows, which is all right. But I think the best thing for you, as you mentioned, is to visit with Public Works and see what you need to do to get this property developed and make sure that what you're doing is the same thing for everybody. So whatever you have to do, everybody would have to do the same thing. So I think that's important for you to meet with them. And as Vicki said, for us, if you want these exceptions, they really have to go through staff first and then go to the city council if you don't agree with them. So we're kind of tied, I think, at this point. And I think that's the proper way to do it because I think they'll have a better feel for what you're doing. From us, I think up here we're going to probably stick to the law and whatever has to be done, unless Vicki's got some other options. But anyway, I wanted to say thanks, Jim.
Mr. Chair,
Go ahead.
if I might, I do appreciate that Jim brought this forward, and I doubly appreciate that John Roberts is sitting up there on the dais today, because that's the audience that this discussion should take place at. Planning Commission does not have the authority to review and or consider the exceptions. When we are reviewing a plat, whether it was in 2004, 2014, 2017, or 2018, anytime you plat and or replat, we open up the design criteria manual and we look at what's required for those streets. And even if it was waived in 2004, depending upon the situation in current day standards, it may or may not be waived again. If that plat would have been completed when it was originally submitted from layout phase, that commitment would have been followed through by the city. In 2014, the city adopted a new infrastructure design criteria manual, and it does have additional triggers of requirement that weren't there in 2004. At the end of the day, regardless of whether it was the variance that was granted in 2004, the exceptions that were granted in part and denied in part in 2017, or the exceptions that are needed today in 2018, it is ultimately the city council in every one of those situations that makes the final decision if staff doesn't approve them. So the audience that needs to hear this discussion and make that final decision is the city council. I, again, appreciate that Jim brought forward all this information. It will give the Public Works staff an opportunity to review in detail with Jim what those requirements are today based on the difference in those design criteria manuals. And having John sit here today will allow him to be a voice at the city council meeting when those items come forward.
Thanks, Vicki. Let's go to Vince.
Thank you for bringing this to our attention. I do appreciate your time and your story. Can I ask one question? Going back to the original plat, what was your reason for not going forward at that time?
When you say original plat, when I brought the layout originally,
2004.
well, I was arguing with Marcia about dedicating right-of-way. And the other problem is I did not know how the development of that property would move forward. I only had, for example, I can only have one approach on East St. Pat.
No, that's okay.
I couldn't tie into the 42-inch sewer main on East St. Pat. So I ended up having, and I can't show this to you, I couldn't break off that parcel of ground in a way that made sense. It had to be broken out, realizing what would happen with the additional development. And Vicki, can I bring this up? Because I'm afraid, because I think that's a good question.
You sure can. I'm going to teach you how to run this thing.
Thank you.
Give me this again. We have to trigger this. Now you can write on it.
So one of the requirements was that I can only have one approach on East St. Pat, and it had to be across from Ash Avenue. When I started this project, I intended to construct this building and the same building over here, just turned 90 degrees. And then I had another building site in here. If I would have platted it that way, I mean, you can look at the different plats I've submitted. None of them are close to the one that I've submitted recently. I did not know how I was going to develop that property is basically what it came down to. I had to bring the sewer in from this direction. I couldn't get an approach off of East St. Pat. You know, I had to, it wasn't as simple as, here's your approach, here's your utilities, you know, plat it and go build this stuff.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, seeing the lights up, I guess maybe a question for me. Do we, just to confirm, are we talking about continuing this for a couple meetings and then meeting with public staff, or would it be better to proceed and then deal with an appeal to the council over stipulations? Or can you maybe clarify what's the best route to accomplish this, Vicki?
So regardless, the preliminary subdivision plan with the stipulations needs to go forward. This is just a what if. If I were to plat, what would be required? That's all a preliminary subdivision plan is. In fact, it's kind of a beefed up version of a layout plan that we used to plat that we used to do back in 2004. His next step after this goes forward from Planning Commission is to take the exceptions that he has requested through staff that have been denied, appeal them. He will then have an audience before the Public Works Committee and an audience before the City Council. Public Works Committee will make a recommendation, Council will make the final decision. So in order to create the 4 lots in the step 1 of the platting process, this action needs to be completed before you can go on to step 2. It would be my recommendation, since it's not the authority of the Planning Commission to consider the exceptions anyway, that we allow this to go forward today, and then as he proceeds with the exceptions, the preliminary subdivision plan and exceptions potentially could be considered at council, if not together, very close together at those meetings. Is that okay with you, Jim?
Well, here's my concern. I disagree with the
Wait,
report.
hold on, Jim, hold on. We've got a motion by Karen to approve this per staff recommendations. And a second from Mike. Okay.
Mr. Chair?
Yep.
Jim just said that he disagrees with the report, and that doesn't set right with me. So it would be my recommendation that we continue this for 2 weeks, allow Jim to visit with the Public Works staff. If there is anything that we can do further to ensure that we understand his concerns, and if there are any corrections needed, that we make them, I want to make sure that we are all on the same page with what the criteria requires in the infrastructure design criteria manual as this item goes forward. I was hoping to keep his project on a timeline, but if that doesn't upset your timeline, then let's continue it to our next meeting, which would be June 21st. And hopefully by that time, we'll have resolved that part of the discussion. And hopefully Jim will acknowledge that the exceptions are potentially better benefited to be discussed at Public Works Committee and Council and not Planning Commission.
I'll withdraw my motion.
Okay. Probably would seek a motion to continue.
I'll make the motion to.
Okay, we've got a motion by Karen, second by Mike to continue this to June 21st. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion passes. Come on back, Eric. What?
Item number 11.
Item number 11 is 18 PD 014, a major amendment to a plan development for the Pennington County Jail to expand the boundary of the plan development and to do some renovations and expansion to the jail complex. Let's get started. Property's located at 307 St. Joseph Street and 240 Kansas City Street, so it's got frontage on St. Joe and Kansas City. It's actually zoned public district, and everything to the east, north is zoned urban commercial district. Those are recent rezonings. I think we've had this on review longer than needed to be, but here's an aerial showing the jail complex as it is today. And here we have future land use. The western portion is public, and then the east portion of the property is downtown and St. Joseph Street and Main Street. You can see our revitalization corridors. If we go back to the zoning, the reason this is zoned public district is because a detention facility or jail would not be a conditional or permitted use in the urban commercial district. So if we had an updated map that showed the urban commercial district, which is part of that zoning district that to connect school mines and downtown, and it has reduced setbacks and trying to bring property up to property lines, that's the reason this isn't urban commercial district, is because the use that's there, a jail detention facility, is not conditional or permitted in urban commercial. And there we see the major street plan. We've got St. Joe and Main Street as principal arterial streets. In particular, they're looking to secure covered parking on the north side of the property. Where there is an existing parking lot, they're going to put a cover over it. And then they're going to be doing some remodeling of the interior, constructing a conference room, relocating laundry and kitchen facilities, and adding a loading dock on the south side of the property. So that's the covered parking on St. Joe. And if we go back, here we have the loading facility, which is on that Kansas City side of the street. The reason this was continued out before was that there was some discussion with staff about the width of the approach location being proposed on Kansas City Street. And you'll notice one of the stipulations of approval is that either it be designed to design requirements of the city, or they obtain an exception to allow a wider approach than what is allowed. The applicant is requesting 3 exceptions. The first is to reduce that front yard setback along Kansas City Street from 25 feet to 1 foot. As I said, if this were urban commercial district, that would be promoting a 0 to 10 foot setback, bringing structures closer to the street to make it more pedestrian oriented. So with the surrounding zoning and the area that it's located, It's in keeping with the intent of the comprehensive plan and the ordinance and the adopted downtown area master plan, and staff is recommending that that exception be approved. The other exception is to allow a fence height along the property line, which will be enclosing along the parking garage, an 8-foot fence, which would be the maximum allowed in public district along the property line would be 4 feet. So they're asking for 8 feet. And then the other exception is to allow a fence 12 feet in height interior. Both the fencing that's being requested, it's for security purposes. This is a jail facility. They need to be secure. And for that reason, staff is recommending that the exception to the fence height be granted. Here's some elevations showing what that will look like along the fencing, and then again, some more elevations. And that's the proposed fencing material for that covered parking that they're proposing, so they can secure some of that parking. And then here's some turning movements on that approach location, which is being proposed along Kansas City Street. And it's either obtain an exception or design it in compliance with the city designs. And here we're looking at the existing facility. The sign is posted on the property. This is the area where that loading dock will be located along Kansas City Street. This is looking south on Kansas City, to the east and to the west. And then we're looking at the parking garage, parking facility, interior. In this back area is where that covered parking will be. This is looking west into the property. And then along St. Joseph Street towards downtown to the west, and to the east towards the school mines in the distance. And then this is the area of that covered parking, and then the fencing, which will be enclosing it. And across the street to the north on St. Joe, existing development. With that, staff is recommending that the major amendment be approved with stipulations noted in the staff report. Are there any questions for staff, or the applicant's agent is available in the audience?
Thanks, Fletcher. Karen's up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Fletcher, I just have a question about the fencing, and I was trying to visualize it. I support the application, but is the fencing going to be on the outside, excuse me, the outside of the parking structure?
Well, the parking structure is along the property line, so it's going to be within the, sort of on the outside edge of the parking structure. I don't know if it's going to be within the column.
Could you
Within the
come up to the
columns.
microphone if you're going to address? Sorry. No, I mean, we'd love to hear from you, but we just need you at the microphone so we can get it on record. And
Yep.
please identify yourself.
Leah Berg with ACES, the engineering firm. It'll be within the columns of the parking structure. So it won't be outside of the parking structure. It'll be right in line with it.
Okay, so if somebody's going to use that parking structure, they can still get in without going through a fence?
Oh, yep, the driveway will still be open. It'll just be one section of that parking structure will be enclosed.
Gotcha.
For the sheriff's office.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Vince?
Thank you, Mr. President. Just wanted to know, is there a color design for this fence?
We had the proposed elevations. Let me pull those up. That's the fencing that would be enclosing some of the parking along St. Joseph Street. I don't know if they have a color picked out.
Yep, it's just going to be black.
Okay, thank you.
Yep, the decorative fence is just black.
I don't have any other lights up for questions. Anybody need any more clarification? Otherwise, I'd look for a motion, I guess. Okay, Rachel made the motion to approve item 11 with per the staff stipulations, and Mike seconded that motion. Any discussion on the motion? All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Item number 12.
Item number 12 is a major amendment to a plan development to allow an electronic reader board sign. As you'll remember, Planning Commission has directed staff to bring forward any electronic reader board sign that's located within a plan development or a conditional use permit so that you can review it and determine its appropriateness for the location. This property is located at 316 East Kansas City Street and is the location of the Newman Center. Here we have the correct zoning map. That purple color is the urban commercial district. We've recently looked at the Alumni Center located on the property to the east through a plan development, and then we have School of Mines further east in that green, which is Park Forest District. Here we have an aerial showing how the property is developed with the structure and parking. Future land use is, I believe, mixed-use commercial, and again, East St. Joe is a revitalization corridor and principal arterial streets. The proposed sign originally was in this area. It was a ground sign, did not have an electronic message board. They're proposing the same location on that southwest corner. There you can see the original sign that was proposed. And then here's what is being proposed with this application. It's approximately 8 feet by 7 feet, the size of the monument sign, and then a 2 foot 7 inch by 5 foot 6 inch LED message board. The applicant has indicated that it's intended to better communicate with members and visitors to the area, the school and the Newman Center. And here's a mock-up of what that sign would look like. Here's pictures of the property where the sign is posted. You'll notice in the background of the picture is student housing. This is a residential area just off of campus. Looking back toward along Kansas City Street to the west or east, School of Mines campus back there. To the west, to the south, we've got Hill Zone Park Forest District. It's currently void of any structural development. And then looking along that side street towards St. Joseph Street and Main Street. Those are the main commercial corridor, revitalization corridor. The urban commercial district does allow signage, does allow electronic reader board signs. It is in compliance with the sign code. As I said, the Planning Commission has directed staff to bring any electronic reader board signs before the Planning Commission for review. So if the Planning Commission determines that this is an appropriate sign in the appropriate location, then staff would recommend to approve with stipulations noted in the staff report.
Thank you. Mike Klosny.
Sorry. And then what's on that sign is going to point towards, is there housing just to the?
There is currently, I believe it's a rental house to the west of the property. We'll go to the aerial. So we have apartment buildings to the north. The new Alumni Center will be to the east, and then this is a residential block. In the downtown area master plan, this area is identified as neighborhood, and neighborhood place style is recommended, which promotes more commercial and service on heavier trafficked intersections. This wouldn't be that, but it's one of the things we looked at as staff.
Okay, then I thought I read in the report that there would be where the lighting would dim.
That's the applicant's intent, is to dim the lighting, so they'd be going by their operations plan on that one.
Okay. Well, it's a great structure down there. I think it's a wonderful facility. I can understand the need for communication, but anytime we put signage in, especially LED signage, and it affects people as they're late at night, I think it's important that we address that issue and take care of it and make sure that we are not affecting the neighbors as we go forward. And if we can do that, I would fully back this, but.
Kurt, you're up.
Yeah, I agree with what Mike says, to be the least obstructive and, invasive to the neighbors. My question is this going to be operated 24/7, or is there, going to be turned off at night?
If you want to come up.
Could we have you come up, Cliff? Same request. Identify yourself once you're up, and then.
Hello, my name is Cliff Beanert, and I'm a member of the Newman Center Advisory Committee, I'm leading this project to put this sign in. And to answer the questions, 2 points I'd like to make. Answer the question is, we can stipulate that we'll operate it between 6 a.m. and 10 p.m. That would not be an issue. We're really focused at when the main traffic, the student traffic, so that we can communicate with the members of the Newman Center, which is really a significant group. It's a very active community. And I'd like to point out that I'm also a member of the South Dakota School of Mines Foundation Real Estate Committee. And I was part of the new Placer Hall that was placed not too far from here. The foundation also owns almost all of the land west of there in the 200 block. What you reference as residential, it's really multifamily. It's a sixplex and a duplex and a fourplex, and then there's 2 houses on the corner immediately adjacent across the street. Our intent, in fact, we have a meeting scheduled for Monday at 11 a.m. to discuss with school officials to transform that section of 200 block even further. We'd like to put another dormitory for graduate and international students in there. And so that whole area is transforming. The planning representative here referenced the Alumni Center. We just demolished those buildings yesterday, or the last 2 days. So that whole section is transforming. It's really not residential anymore in that immediate area. Any other questions?
No, I don't have any more. Thanks.
Thank you. Vicki?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to remind the Planning Commission that our sign code has strict operational standards for any LED signage, and there's a requirement that they have an automatic dimmer sensor so that as the skies get darker, the sign gets less illuminated, especially during our winter times when some days are fairly dark all day long. I don't know if adding a stipulation that the sign actually be turned off is necessary, plus it would be very hard to police. But when we issue the sign permit, we'll ensure that it's designed with all of the necessary standards as set forth by the ordinance.
Thanks, Vicki. Mike?
I guess I would just like to acknowledge that the foundation has done a wonderful job down there. I think that area is developing great for the city of Rapid City, for the School of Mines. I just really like what they've done, and it's a great area now. I think it's really developed nicely. And I think that you'll do good as far as making sure the signage doesn't affect the students, because they need their sleep, and I'm sure they sleep at night. They don't go out any place. They're in bed by 9 o'clock, and so we'll go from there.
Thanks, Mike. Appreciate the comments. Any further questions or comments on this item?
Motion to approve.
All right. Mike Goller made the motion to approve. Is there a second? Second. Mike Kwasny made the second. Any discussion on the motion? All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries.